Listeners, welcome back. As I mentioned at the top of the show, we are joined today by two distinguished guests and a regular contributor. And today's topic on our first segment simply is client expectations. I've been getting a lot of listener email lately about this topic, so we thought that we would put together a small panel here and have a discussion today about just that. So joining us on our panel today are two attorneys. Jason Evans is a senior associate at Leslie R. Evans and Associates in Palm Beach, Florida, where he concentrates on commercial litigation, enforcement of judgments, and all aspects of real estate law. Prior to joining the firm in January of 2009, Jason was associate at Tarter, Krinsky, and Drogan in New York City, where he focused on commercial litigation, and also served as general counsel to a real estate trust with substantial holdings in Midtown Manhattan. Before attending Nova Southeastern Law School, Jason worked as a tax accountant for Arthur Andersen and News Corp in New York City. Jason, welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you.
Sheila Engelmeyer, good friend of mine. I've worked with Sheila for many years here in Minneapolis, has practiced employment law for more than 25 years. She has chaired employment groups at large law firms and is the one of the founders at Engelmeyer and Humana. She focuses her practice on employment matters, shareholder issues, and the challenges facing early childhood education. She is a graduate of the University of Minnesota Law School, a prolific author, and a well-known speaker. Sheila, welcome to the program.
Thanks much, Paul.
Mm-hmm. And guests, you know our co-host of this segment. He has been on the program several times. Joining us today is regular contributor Dave Pellegrinelli. Dave is the president of AFX Search LLC, Investigations of West Palm Beach, and his firm specializes in fraud investigations, hidden asset discovery, corporate due diligence, lie detection services, and title forensics. Dave, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here as usual. Thanks, Paul.
Jason and Sheila, as I mentioned to you prior to the show, our topic today is client expectations. Our listenership, as you know, is largely, licensed PIs around the country, many of them actually abroad as well. And the mission of our program here is to try to help them do a better job in their businesses. So we focus a lot on marketing and operational issues, and I think this is an important topic here. So my first question for both of you, we'll start with you, Sheila, is how often and for what purposes do you or your colleagues engage private investigators? What's a typical scenario?
Okay, so in my world, there's a couple of different things because we do both sides of employment-related disputes. Background information is real important to the employment world. If we're helping a company select a new officer or advising them with respect to, is this the right guy or gal, we want a deep investigative background check, and that's one of the things that we reach out for. We often, from the employer side, have fraud issues, and then we have sort of from the employee side, if we're representing an individual and we're trying to negotiate a contract or make a claim or something like that, we want to know about their background too. And so we need some help in that, and we may need some help reaching out to witnesses in a litigated matter. So those are the kinds of things that we use investigators for.
Jason, how about your world? How often and what's a typical situation that you might bring in some outside help?
Well, typically we bring in outside help when, I live in two worlds. I live in the real estate law world, and I also do commercial litigation. My practice is split 50-50. In the real estate world, we work with a lot of commercial owners of shopping centers and buildings, and typically we get a guarantee where an individual, an officer of the corporation will guarantee the debts of the corporation. So the value of that guarantee depends on whether or not that person is collectible and of net worth that can support signing a lease, which would induce the landlord to sign a lease. That it could change the rate, the annual rent if the guarantor has got substantial assets. that's where we look to a PI.
Interesting. Well, let's get into the weeds now here. Dave's going to lead our conversation now as we talk a little bit more about what you expect out of your private investigative vendors. Dave?
Yeah, I think that the listeners and investigators in general would really like to be responsive to the needs of clients and trying to find out how we can help the process of you selecting the right PI. So what do you think, and I'll start with Jason to give you a couple seconds here. What do you think the factors are that would be most helpful in selecting the right investigative professional? Is it background, their experience, price? What kind of things do you look at? Jason, go first.
Well, typically price is the first thing that jumps at me. Typically, I'm the one that refers to my client which PI to use because they don't typically work with one. Right. But in working with private investigators, first comes price and then comes results. If I feel that we're getting a good price for the results, then that's the private investigator that I'm going to continue to work with and continue to recommend to my clients. But only after a full search can I come to a conclusion whether or not it was a good value to my client.
Sheila, do you share that, or you have a different point of view?
I have a different point of view. I, believe that value is the key, which is very different from price. Because often, in the legal world, in any kind of professional services, including the investigation professional services, people are pitching me on price when what I need to hear from you is, why should I trust you? Why do you have the expertise that I need? How are you going to help me in this problem? And what's the likelihood I'm going to be satisfied with what you deliver to me? Those are the four things that I'm thinking about. And so when someone is going to talk to me about their investigative services, I want them to anticipate my needs. So one of the interesting things I learned around the time I've been practicing for 20 years is one of my favorite clients told me that the lawyer he liked the best was somebody who listened more than they talked. And, of course, that's unusual in a lawyer. And I have, I have to sometimes put my phone on mute to stop myself from talking. But I think the same applies to investigators. I want them to ask me, what are you looking for? If you could wave a magic wand, what would the outcome be in this situation? And so then they can hear about what I need. I'm not impressed by, I've been doing this for 50 years, everyone loves me. I'm impressed about my unique need and how you can fill it.
That makes really good sense, and I think that's good news for investigators who are trying to build their business. So based on that, what helps you get connected with the right investigators in terms of marketing? How can investigators best reach you and get the information about what they can do? Do you respond to direct mail? Is it email? Is it networking? What kind of marketing or advertising reaches you the best?
So for me, I'm not terribly impressed by advertising. I'm super busy, which most lawyers are, so direct mail and email might go in junk and on the list of things to read when I have a chance, and they turn yellow before I read them. And so for me, when somebody's reaching out to me, if they've looked at what my work is and if somebody's going to pitch me, I want them to have studied about me and said, hey, I looked on your website and I see that you do this and this. We have this unique thing we can do for you that really might help you. So I feel like if they've thought about me before they pitch me, that is something that's really important, and that would be very effective for me.
That's good feedback. So Jason, what would be ways that a best way for investigators to make you aware of the type of professional that they are and how they can help your case?
I think just delivering good results for a long period of time helps. Typically, when I'm looking for an investigator in a particular area, I'll call up an associate or a fellow colleague and try and get a referral, testimonial. few questions about that person. Then what I'll do, the next step is I'll go to the website. I'd like to see a website that's clean, it's orderly, because that tells a lot also about the investigator. I believe that if they take their online marketing seriously, that they're also going to be very professional and diligent in their search. And it lets me know that they're well-versed in with technology and are able to find a variety of sources that can bring together what we're looking for.
Hey, that might be a pretty good indication. Go ahead, Paul.
I hope our listeners are taking notes here, because for those of you who have listened to the program for a long time, you know how much I harp about these kind of things here. My firm has not spent a dime on advertising in 21 years of being in business. And we have built our practice really in two ways. And Sheila, if you recall, the way you and I met is that I had given a presentation to a small practice group at a firm that Sheila worked at. This had to be in the mid-'90s. And what came out of that was that I knew what the needs were of this very small select group of attorneys. And Sheila engaged me shortly after that. So that kind of reinforces her point here that you need to be really directing your message at a market that's going to be extremely narrow. You can't have a presentation for a law firm. You have to have a presentation for employment lawyers, for litigators, etc. And Jason, your point is exceptional. Our firm onboarded 350 new clients last year, and virtually all of them were by referral. And I always ask, so if I get a new attorney from Minneapolis, I say, how'd you hear from us? Well, I put it out to the firm, and 6 people said to give you a call. And I'm particularly impressed, Jason, with your comment about looking at someone's website, and that truly is a reflection of who they are. There's some abominable websites out there, not just for PIs, but also for attorneys. It's critically important, and I'm really glad that both of you brought both of these things up, because I think they're really, really on point.
Well, one thing I want to say that I forgot to say, okay, so what am I looking for on the website? I'm looking for your knowledge base, but I'm mostly looking for what your clients say about you. So if you don't have something about, it's kind of my way in a little firm, because I only have, there's only 10 of us here, whereas I have the sense that Jason's in a much larger firm, and I've been in much larger firms. So I can do, what do you know, who do you use to a larger network? But I also could get that data from the website, and there's a huge difference between advertising and getting your name out there, like being in the paper in an article that's written by someone else. Promotion is great. Advertising, knowing that you paid for it doesn't mean so much. But if I see an article in the paper about one of which, I have one of Paul hung up on my wall, which is also yellow, and it's about when someone locally did an article about, if you're going to catch someone in fraud, here's what you do, and there's Paul's head in the paper and blah, blah, blah. So when I feel like a reporter thinks he's awesome, that means more to me than somebody paying for advertising.
Yeah, and to that point, I want to jump back to something, Jason, that you said, where there's examples of things that you can use to give referrals. If you're getting referrals from other attorneys or success stories from other attorneys about PIs, what type of successes have you had with investigators that would make you maybe suggest an investigator to somebody else? What's one example of a good success that a PI helped your case?
Well, I'm going to speak directly to you, Dave. The reason why I'm here is because I've worked with Dave over the past few years. And Dave helped me. I had a client who had a judgment of $1 million out of state, and I went to him with little information. And I had known Dave. We worked nearby, and I gave him basic information. We thought it would be a shot in the dark. And Dave, in a very professional way, was able to find that that the debtor had well over $1 million in bank accounts, and he was very liquid. So we were able to secure 100% of the judgment for our client, and he was thrilled. And I think I was even more thrilled, even though I didn't get the $1 million. I was extremely satisfied with the result, and it was a huge home run. And it really opened my eyes to the to all the judgments that are out there, and all the business that's potentially out there with all the losses people have experienced over the last few years.
Yeah, that's another thing where if you have success in a case, it may even make you think about using a PI for other cases that you might have not thought about before. Sheila, tell us about a success story that you've had with an investigator that might make you think about referring that person to somebody else.
Well, I've had lots of them, and they fall into each different categories. Remember, I talked about the importance of background checks that are deep. So helping my client not hire some buffoon that I didn't have an appreciation was a buffoon was very helpful and really endeared both myself and an investigator to the board, knowing that when we looked more closely at a certain officer, there was a bad history out there with respect to allegations of inappropriately managing money or things of that nature. That has helped a lot. I've gotten a lot of assistance in the way of talking with difficult witnesses. And as lawyers, we sometimes have not as sweet of a rapport as some investigators do with folks. And I have found a lot of investigators have a knack for being able to communicate with a wide variety of folks better than many of my legal colleagues have, or even my paralegals have, with respect to talking to witnesses, and I really appreciate that.
And to that point, since you both are attorneys, from the legal end, what can investigators do to help the process to make sure that their work product is privileged, so that when they're working on a case, the work product of the investigator stays privileged, and what steps should they take while they're working on it to protect that privilege for you in your case? And we'll start with Sheila.
Well, I think the investigator should be retained by the lawyer as opposed to the client.
Mm-hmm.
And there should be a contract between the lawyer, because the work product privilege really arises from the lawyer's work product privilege.
Right.
So if you're my agent, my work product privilege extends to you, and you have to, if you're saying it is your work product which is important and isn't shared, then you better not be sharing it. So
Right.
if, for example, you're showing one witness notes from another witness, you're going to be hard-pressed to say that that's work product that you wouldn't share. Talking about those things are very different than actually showing the work. And I think we all have to be mindful of how we write emails and making it clear that, this is the work. For example, putting on the top, work product privileged, putting on the bottom, work product privileged. Make sure you keep it within the loop between the lawyer. If the client wants to call and ask a bunch of questions, get the lawyer on the phone so that you can take the position that that's a privileged communication, things of that nature.
I think that's a good reminder for investigators. That's a point that sometimes is overlooked, that when you're working for an attorney, that the privilege is a really important part of that process. Jason, do you have anything you want to add to that subject of privilege with investigators?
Well, just to continue where you were going, which is, if I'm an investigator, and first off, Sheila, you absolutely nailed that question. But going back, if I were an investigator, I would, again, make sure that you put privileged and confidential on it, and I would on the documents that you send, and also make sure that you get retained by the attorney as opposed to the client.
Excellent. Paul, what do you think about all that?
It's interesting. We kind of, over the years, I think this area is kind of developed in how we all work together. We tend to be almost to the extreme. I'll slap privilege and confidential on any damn thing. And, if you need it, it's there. If you don't, you don't. The question that I have that's interesting, and this comes up quite a bit, and lawyers have different viewpoints on this. One is that, just title everything to me, but the financial end of this needs to be between you and the client. So I'm interested in what Jason and Sheila think about that. So here's a typical scenario. Lawyer calls, hey, let's say it's a family law case. We think the husband's squirreling away assets somewhere. I'll recommend that we probably should run this through the law firm. Yeah, do that, but I just send the invoice and everything to her. Do you think that hurts any argument that is privileged if the client is actually paying the bill, or should the law firm pay the bill?
Here's what I think. Go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say, a lot of that depends on how the client has been retained. If there's a fee and cost retainer, then that would certainly eliminate the direct payment from a client to an investigator. But certainly, before I ever engage any agent, I always get approval or I give some sort of a quote if I can or an estimate to the client.
My preference is to have the law firm make the payment, and to protect the law firm, I tell my client, I have an arrangement with my client, as Jason astutely pointed out, that says you're going to pay the costs. And just so you know, when it's over X dollars, you're going to pay it up front before I pay it. Mm-hmm. And so when I get the bill from the investigator, I send it on to the client saying, reminder, here's our fee agreement that says you pay these sorts of things, but we're going to run it through our firm because I'm the one who retained them. So as soon as you give me the money, I will in turn pay this person. Mm-hmm. That's how I prefer to do it.
And I think that the fact that we're talking about this, who's going to pay, who is the one engaging the investigator, it brings up a good point that the investigator should also be clear who is going to be responsible for the payment. Because even though there'll be communication with maybe the end user client and also the attorney, it should be clear up front who is actually going to pay the bill, when is it going to be paid, and even if the retainer might come from one party, the final bill might come from somebody else. So that's a good point too.
Well, not to mention the fact that what if the client doesn't pay? Isn't it on me? I've retained you. The risk I'm taking is if my client turns out to be a turd, I got to pay you.
That's right. Who's the ultimate credit risk? Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. We have learned to be so clear on that the engagement is with the law firm, and I can talk to the client, but nothing that I produce is going to be titled to them. We can talk about it, but everything runs through the law firm, and that helps too when it comes time to pay the bill. Because you all know that, any of our listeners out there, that a client will tell you, you do whatever it takes. And then all of a sudden you send them a bill and they're freaking out, well, you didn't get me this or that or anything else. So it really does come up to, expectations.
So we must have some of the same clients then, Paul. Yeah.
Well, this has been a really interesting conversation. I do have one other thing I'd like to bring up to Sheila and Jason, and this is largely because I know our listenership so well. Probably the number one job that PIs come from is law enforcement. Law enforcement and military guys tend to retire quite early. They golf for 6 months and they're bored stiff, so they go out and become PIs. And we've had some issues in hiring these kind of guys, and I think it's pretty obvious what those issues are. But I'm interested in what Sheila and Jason think about, what advice would you give someone who's transitioning from law enforcement into the private sector? Jason, do you have any comments on that?
I actually do. I've had experience with this, and The one thing that someone told me when I was a little bit younger, which is, Jason, you're a lawyer. That's your skill. Focus on that. Don't try to do things outside of that, because it might take you a lot longer to learn, what you need to know. So, in the limited experience I've had with retaining people who were previously law enforcement, I find that sometimes they're acting like a police officer and not like a counselor or an advisor or a business person who's listening to what I need to say. So I do find sometimes there are communication problems there. The one person that I'm thinking of particularly was an excellent investigator, was able to get me the results that I needed, but I got the bill late. It was misquoted. So there were some issues on the business side. So my suggestion would be that if you're thinking about transitioning from law enforcement into private investigation services, I would perhaps, I know this might sound awkward, but maybe take an internship or take a job as an associate with a larger firm or solo, so that you can watch and observe the business side of things, because as a police officer, you don't really have that exposure.
Sheila?
I would say, yeah, I do. Simply, you're not in law enforcement anymore. You don't get to tell people what to do. Mm-hmm. And law enforcement comes with lots of power associated with it. And that's sometimes why judges who retire don't make awesome lawyers. Sometimes they do. That they're so used to bossing everybody around. And as a lawyer, you have to cajole people. You don't really, when someone's paying you for your time, they don't like being bossed around. And so I think Jason's point is very well taken. And what I find is many law enforcement types have a style that's commensurate with the power that they possess. So you have to develop a little bit different style to effectively communicate. And for me, not only is an option to work with another firm, but you might take some training. You might take some marketing training. You might take some training with respect to communication. Because at the end of the day, when you're in a professional services business, how you communicate may be the single most important tool you have.
So it sounds like between the two of both of you, it sounds like that picking up business skills, maybe finesse, and especially diplomacy are the things that might help a former law enforcement person become a great investigator.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dave, I'm not certain if your agency has ever hired law enforcement folks over the years, but the things that I find, and I'm interested in your input on this, is that they tend to overwork cases because they've never worked with a budget before.
Well, it's the budget part and the financial statement. Understanding of financial statements is kind of a big black hole, because, like you said, they've never been exposed to it. A lot of times, I find if I take the time to work them through that part of it, show them sometimes how the mechanics of numbers work, they get it better. And sometimes I spend more time on that at the beginning than anything else, because that's the part that they have the least amount of exposure to. And I find that they pick it up pretty quick because it's mechanical, it's analytical, it's methodical, it's logical, which kind of fits in line with a typical law enforcement kind of mindset. So it's pretty easy to pick up. You just have to have that exposure with the person.
The other problem, of course, is report writing, because if they've been writing reports a certain way for typically 20-some years, that can be a hard thing to overcome. And then, my first experience with hiring a former detective was that he kept referring to our client who had been charged with sex assault as the bad guy.
Yeah, that's not going to be good.
I thought, oh boy, we have an issue here.
Yeah. It's not going to be
good.
good.
Law enforcement folks don't need to feel badly about, the skill set that they developed to be good at that job might present a bit of a challenge. That's true for lawyers as well. You go to law school and learn about the law. which then you get to be a lawyer, and what counts as being creative and problem solving and lots of things, business savvy that you don't learn. And so, all of us have these sort of growing pains.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
Yeah, good point. Well, this has been really, really interesting, Jason and Sheila, and I can't tell you how much we appreciate your time. Just make sure you bill this time to someone's file. Not mine, no, Sheila.
I think there might be an ethical problem with that, but
Yeah.
go ahead.
That's another show.
Yeah.
But I really do appreciate your time here. Our listeners are really, really interested in this kind of stuff, and I know that it's going to be helpful and that we'll get some really good feedback on this. So thanks again. Listeners, of course, all the information on our guests, Sheila, Jason, and Dave, will be available at AmericanPrivateInvestigator.com. So if you do want to do any outreach, you can find their information there. Again, thank you, everyone, for participating today. It's been great.